Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. From the Tualatin Valley Community Television Studios in beautiful green Beaverton, Oregon, we bring you the Conversations with Dr. Don show. For you first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we decide to talk about. Occasionally, Conversations with Dr. Don is a special live call-in show. Tonight is one of those occasions, so be ready to take down the call-in number when we show it to you on the screen. Also note the date of creation of this show on the bottom of the screen so that you don't attempt to call in when this show is a rerun. Please call in with your questions or comments when we ask you to. Tonight we're going to talk about where is Obama going? That's an interesting title, isn't it? Now, Dr. Seward and I have talked about a title and we've gone back and forth, and we agree that this is a good title because I'm not sure where he's going and I'm not sure you know where he's going. But we're going to talk about it, and you will call in and let us know where you think he's going or whatever else that you find would be useful for us to talk about. So, Dr. Seward has been on the show before, and I've seen him talk to us at the Humanists of Greater Portland, and he's always been intriguing, truly intriguing and interesting. And a few times I've asked provocative questions to try to get him sort of one position so I could argue with him, and he always has an accurate answer, and I always end up feeling, well, God, I love this guy. I want to have him on the show some more. And I really enjoy what he's about and how objective he works at being, in my honest opinion. And I love how you are and what you're about.
Thank
so let me read a little bit about what was said last Sunday morning when you presented at the Humanists of Greater Portland. Dr. Jeff Seward is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Politics and Government at Pacific University. Dr. Seward is at once a specialist on Brazil and a generalist with interests in comparative politics, political philosophy, political economy, women in politics, comparative religion, and politics and literature and film. Wow. That broad spectrum of interests comes partly from growing up.
I'm a complete dilettante, in other words.
That broad spectrum of interest comes partly from growing up the son of a career Air Force officer and living in 6 different states and Germany as a child. Wow. He continued to look through a wide lens in his higher education, changing majors 3 times and attending 6 universities in the course of obtaining his academic degrees. How did you characterize yourself a minute ago? A dilettante?
Right.
A little more on this, okay?
Okay.
Even when he had decided on a major, the pattern didn't break. He focused first on Europe, especially France, then comparative communism, then Asia, especially China and Japan, followed by Latin America, and finally, more narrowly, on Brazil. Even the medium through which he chooses to communicate varies. Prior to his academic career, Professor Seward was a political reporter and documentary film producer for public television. 2 of his documentaries received national recognition, and he is currently working on a feature-length video about a group of Peruvian women pioneers in the computer science professions. How old are you?
60. I just turned 60.
Almost.
I'm getting a whole nother set of discounts now at all the stores.
A little more.
A little more.
It was in Brazil that Jeff met his Peruvian wife, Maria, who's here in the studio with us, and decided, having already learned Portuguese, that he would have to learn Spanish as well. He is now working on French. He has spoken to HDP on the topics of progressive governments, that's a Humanist of Greater Portland, on the topics of progressive governments in Latin America and the post-Bush foreign policy for the U.S. Please welcome Dr. Jeff Seward. Thank you for coming on.
Well, I'm pleased to be here again, Don.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. And this look on my face now, because what you've done and your education and your dilettanting or whatever it is that you've done, it's just beautiful. I've done the same thing, but not quite at that level in my life. I've done a lot of things. Anyhow, we don't want to talk about me right now, but I admire what you've done and what you're about now. And I love to share with you and your thoughts about the topic or anything else with my viewers.
Well, where's Obama going?
Mm-hmm.
People seem awfully confused about this. And personally, I don't find it that confusing. I think people react to him on the basis of they know where they wish he was going, and he's not going quite there. And so they're very upset about that, whether they're on the right or the left or where they think he is. And they find him confusing because he doesn't fit neatly into their categories. Partly, I think, because I have this sort of strange, eclectic background, which isn't very similar to Obama's, but is similar in the sense of being sort of a little of this and a little of that and some of this over there. And I feel, on the other hand, and this may be a danger, this may be why I don't understand him at all, I feel like I know exactly where he's going. He's going where I would go if I were him. And so I identify with what I think he's doing. And so the apparent ambiguities and the apparent contradictions and the apparent, oh, now he's a conservative, oh, now he's a wild-eyed progressive, oh, now he's a Clintonian centrist, makes sense to me. Now, as I say, I may just be projecting my own values onto him, and so
you wouldn't do that, would
I
you?
may be completely wrong, and he may disappoint me next week, and I'll be. But I would characterize his perspective with one of two phrases. You can take your pick. They end up being about the same thing in some sense. Is either he's a progressive conservative, which sounds like a contradiction, but I don't think is exactly, or it doesn't have to be, or he's a radical centrist, which also sounds like a contradiction, but doesn't have to be.
A progressive conservative or a radical centrist?
Yeah, which one of those would you like to unpack first?
I'm not going to take a chance on that.
Why don't you which one would you like me to start on? Well, let's take the progressive conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Because Obama's constantly making conservative gestures, right? He's perfectly willing to give a speech that's couched in pretty traditional Christian language, although the Christianity that he came to is a progressive Christianity rooted in black liberation theology of the Reverend Wright, despite his distancing of himself from Reverend Wright. But still, he learned the language of the black church, which in many ways is not so different from the language of the evangelical right. And so he uses that language sometimes. He makes appointments sometimes to the right. He makes bows to market economics sometimes. He talks about preserving traditions sometimes. He talks about traditional values. A lot of his inaugural speech was hearkening back to American traditions. So there's a certain sound of conservatism to him, but I don't think he's a conservative in any classical sense. I think he wants to build a coalition in which some kinds of conservatives can be brought into that coalition, but not all kinds of conservatives.
It would help me if you would tell me what you mean, in a general sense, by a conservative and what you mean by a progressive.
Well, by a progressive conservative here, I'm reminded of a phrase, I don't have the exact quote, of the famous conservative Edmund Burke, who said something along the lines of a society that is incapable of changing itself doesn't have the means to preserve itself. I think Obama is sincere when he says, my story is only possible in this country for someone like me to have risen to this position. He admires that about America which allowed him to be possible. That over time, not always, not right away, but over time, America has become, through the struggles of millions of people and thousands of social movements, more and more inclusive, able to give opportunity to all kinds of people. And he wants to preserve that and deepen that and extend that. So he admires the country. He admires what it has done to make him possible. And I think what's progressive about him is he wants to extend that opportunity universally. And his experiences growing up in Indonesia, growing up in fairly modest circumstances, doing his community organizing work in Chicago, taught him that there are lots of people still excluded. And in some ways he was excluded. And he's not excluded anymore. He's risen to the very top of our pyramid. But I think he remembers that sense of it's important that as we move forward, as we conserve things in the society, that we move forward together and everybody gets included. And I think he has a very strong sense of all the people who are currently excluded from those American values that he wants to conserve and modernize and take forward into the future. So
the implication then is that conservative, generic conservative is one who is interested in conserving that which is useful and good for the society and the culture.
Right.
And a progressive then is someone who wants to conserve and
modernize at the same time, but not make a radical break with that which is valuable.
And to progress in a positive direction such that things are better, if I may.
They are better and more inclusive.
And more inclusive.
In which everybody gets to participate in that which is valued, instead of that which is valued simply being the possession of a privileged few or even a privileged majority. I think one of the most fundamental values that Obama has is everybody ought to get to sit at the table. And I think he has that attitude both within the United States, and I think he has that attitude globally. Now, there are limits to what any particular period can do, what an American president can do, but I think we will find consistently over time that the kinds of things he doesn't want to compromise about are things that speak to inclusiveness. And one issue that came up in the stimulus bill is connected to this. He had the Republicans wanted more tax cuts, right? So he put a few more tax cuts in. He put the tax cut that he advocated during his campaign, $500 basically of payroll tax rebates in a sense, per person, $1,000 for a couple. And the Republicans said, as they'd been saying all through the Bush administration, people who don't pay taxes ought not to get tax rebates, forgetting always that just because someone doesn't pay income taxes doesn't mean they don't pay Social Security taxes, doesn't mean they don't pay property taxes and sales taxes and Medicare taxes. No. And so they said, well, you know, we might be able to go along with this, but you're going to have to take that out of the bill. And Obama was absolutely firm on that. He said, absolutely not. You know, that stays. Those people are taxpayers. Just because they don't pay the taxes that the rich pay doesn't mean they're not paying taxes. And in fact, they pay the most regressive taxes in our system. And they're getting a tax rebate. And so that stayed. He compromised on other things, but that, I think, spoke to that sense of inclusiveness that's a value of his. I'm not going to exclude the poorest people in the country from putting money in their pockets to help stimulate the economy. What sense would that make to his mind? So that's the sense in which, even as he seems, well, gee, I'm going to shore up the system, I'm going to rescue the system from itself, to the extent that he's like FDR, it's I'm going to save capitalism from its own crises and catastrophes, but everybody's coming along. That's the read I have, and that's why I think he's simultaneously, in some sense, both a conservative and a progressive, and doesn't see these as in conflict with each other.
Is capitalism salvageable as it's practiced in this country today since the Reagan era?
Well, that's another question, but if we were going to talk about Obama, I think his answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
You know, we didn't elect a socialist. Obama's not a socialist. We didn't elect a revolutionary. He didn't say he was going to be. The American public wasn't asking for one. It may be that capitalism is not salvageable. We may be in the final crisis of the capitalist system and descending into chaos or descending into an anarchist or socialist utopia.
What do you think?
I think capitalism is going to survive another round or two.
America's version of capitalism?
Well, now, see, that's where we come to the radical centrist part. I think Obama very much wants to salvage capitalism, but he doesn't want to salvage Reagan's capitalism. He doesn't want to salvage Bush's capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I frankly think his vision of capitalism is a very European social democratic vision of capitalism. He wants a capitalism that is appropriately regulated, one that has universal health insurance, one in which the number of poor people is reduced to a much lower level than what we have tolerated in the United States. But he wants to move in a social democratic direction with eclectic means and with a kind of conservative traditional rhetoric. I think what he wants to do is I think he sees in himself and in the public that Americans have social democratic values, or if you wish, even socialist values, about inclusiveness, about fairness, and that if he's pursuing politics that are including more people at the table and are increasing the fairness of America, people will accept that if the means by which he does it don't seem scary.
Jeff, may I call you Jeff?
Absolutely.
You may be causing me a problem because so far what you're saying makes such logical sense until
and yet you completely disagree with it.
And yet if I let my guard down and he doesn't measure up to those ideas that you have about what he's about, then I'm going to blame you for having me let my guard down and be totally
and bamboozled you.
Totally, yeah, thank you. Well put. Maybe we could pose a question or a comment and we can put the number up and open the phone lines up and have some comments or questions based on what we've said so far. Is that appropriate now?
Absolutely, sure.
What would we have our viewers consider now as they call in?
Well, let me mention this other phrase, radical centrist.
Of course.
And what I mean by a radical centrist is a different kind of centrist than the Democratic Leadership Council centrist. Maybe that has a meaning to your viewers, but the Democratic Leadership Council, was this organization that wanted the Democratic Party, which was in the wilderness in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, to sort of move to the center, become more conservative, become in some ways more like the Republicans, to recapture a Democratic majority. Bill Clinton was a leader of it in the beginning, but it often was very conservative in its approach to things. And that kind of centrism I would characterize as people who were captured by what Reagan did to the American political culture. Reagan created a conservative, free market-oriented culture that has lasted almost to today. And the Democratic Leadership Council basically said, we've got no choice but to go along with this. But let's not go along as radically as Reagan is doing. Let's only go half as fast. Let's only go half as far. So let's be Republicans light, so it's not quite as bad as what the Republicans or the conservatives are doing. And in the process, we'll have prevented some bad things from happening and we'll have gathered lots of support. I have no interest in that kind of centrism. And I think Obama has no interest in that kind of centrism. And I don't know if we had any calls, but
let us know when we get a call.
A radical centrism is something different. A radical centrism is to say, there's some fundamental things wrong in the United States. There's some fundamental things that need fixing that we can fix. But we can be eclectic and compromising with conservatives about the means by which we get there. Take the question of tax cuts. I think people on the left have gotten to the point where we sort of feel like, wow, somebody says tax cuts and we want to get out the gun. This guy wants to put a bunch of money in the hands of the rich and that will have no impact on helping anybody's lives. But there are tax cuts and there are tax cuts. Targeted tax cuts that put money in the hands of people who don't have any. Tax cuts that make the tax system more progressive instead of regressive. Ought not to be things that progressives shy away from. Or free markets. Free markets are really powerful mechanisms. They can be used if properly regulated, if properly surrounded with government regulation, with social movements, with other kinds of things. They can be used to produce progressive effects. So I think he's very open-minded, very flexible, very pragmatic about the means that he's willing to use to move towards something like universal health insurance. I don't think he's particularly interested in compromising on that goal long term. He wants universal health insurance. But
With the insurance companies involved?
But with insurance companies involved, with some market mechanisms, with some government regulation. Well, the model I would point to is the French system.
Okay.
You know, the British have a national health service. You know, the government provides the health care and the insurance. They hire the doctors. Sweden and elsewhere, some other countries have a single payer system. France has a mixed system. They've got some private insurance companies, they've got government insurance, it's more government oriented than ours is, but they have both. They've got they've got all kinds of things going on there, but it works pretty well. There's universal health insurance. It's the system that Michael Moore featured in Sicko. What recommends it to America is that we've got this system that's completely in the hands of the private sector almost now, except for old people, for Medicare and Medicaid. And so it's very difficult to dismantle all that and go to a radically different system. But the French example suggests to me, and I suspect suggests to people like Obama, that it's not impossible to get from where we are to universal health insurance and do it in a way that improves the system, gives people more access, and contains the ability of the private health insurers and the private health care givers to just pillage the population economically.
So that's where you think Obama is going as far as health care for the average American.
Right.
And there are those of us who believe that as long as you have the insurance companies involved to any degree whatsoever, like the toe in the door, then we're not going to have, they'll be pushing continually to have more involvement. I think we have a call. We have a call out there. Hello, caller. You have a question or a comment?
That healthcare example probably set someone off.
We're echoing in here.
Oh, okay. That's no problem. I'm actually viewing you on the screen as we speak. I was surfing the net, first time watching you, and of course the name Obama came up and got my interest. I have been listening to your descriptions, Dr. Seward, of Obama, and I have to agree. I believe that he is a progressive conservative with a pinch of radical. What I am interested in finding out is your opinion. In light of the vote on the stimulus package in the House, where we had not one Republican stand up and do anything other than sit on their haunches. And let me say that I'm 60 years old. I was a Republican.
That's the best age. I'm 60 also.
60 years old, a Republican all of my life until this election cycle. I don't know if I had an epiphany, but I started feeling like we had, as conservative Christians, been led down the garden path with a carrot. And when it came to the final outing, we haven't been getting what has been promised. But I really am invested in this new president. I believe that he's going to move us forward. What I'm concerned about is, will the Republicans let him move us forward in a progressive manner? And how does individuals like Pelosi, how does she fit in your description of progressive conservatives? Is she a progressive conservative?
Viewer, tell us your first name and where you're calling from, please.
My name is Marie, and I'm here in Portland, right at the Sylvan exit.
Thank you.
Okay, well, you know, what intrigues me about your call is that you describe yourself as a lifelong Republican and a conservative Christian.
Right.
And yet you say you had an epiphany in this election.
Yes.
And decided that here was the candidate that was making sense to you, and that the Republicans and their conservative Christian base, in some sense, weren't making sense to you.
Yes, in the sense that to me it seemed like the Republican Party was imploding during this election cycle. The tactics which they used which many have said have always been the manner in which they've done business, really offended me. But more than that, it felt like they didn't have the people's interest at heart. And the term inclusiveness that you used when you were describing his agenda really stood out to me. I used to be in nursing. I was injured by a drunk driver, and now I'm living on disability, and have learned over the last 7 years what it's like not to have a working income, and the ability to change that. So I've learned from both sides of that financial structure what it's like to be able to take care of oneself and then suddenly find oneself having to depend on services.
Well, you know, you're exactly the kind of person that I think Obama is consciously trying to appeal to. And he's not trying to appeal to you on the basis of trying to trick you into thinking, oh, he shares all of your beliefs about everything, and so he is one of you, however you define yourself.
No, I think he cares.
He cares, and he is appealing to values that he thinks you share, like inclusiveness. You're a nurse. You aren't a rich person. You aren't a corporate CEO spending $1.2 million to redecorate his office as the country is collapsing into economic crisis. And as a nurse, you've seen people who come into the healthcare system and don't have health insurance, and what that means to people. So I think that and this relates to your point about asking about, well, what was the deal with not a single Republican voted for this stimulus package?
Yeah.
I think Obama has got the Republicans right where he wants them.
Really?
Yes, because on this particular issue, and I don't think this is the way this is going to play out for a long time, he made lots of gestures to Republicans about this stimulus package. He, in an unprecedented way, had big mass meetings with rank-and-file Republicans in the House, rank-and-file Republicans in the Senate. They said, you know, we don't like this stuff about providing money for family planning and so forth. What does that have to do with stimulus? And he said, well, I think it's a good idea, but you're right, it may not have that much to do with stimulus. I'll take it out. They said, gee, there's not enough tax cuts in here. This is all government spending. How about some tax cuts? He said,
what
fine.
They didn't realize with the family planning, and mind you, I'm not for abortion, but I seriously, as a nurse, I know that contraception being provided to those that can't afford it will cut back on unwanted pregnancies.
Right.
And thereby cut down on abortion.
But my point is here, he was willing to compromise on that. He was willing to compromise and introduce some tax cuts. But he said, well, if we're going to have some tax cuts, though, let's target them to small business, let's target them to this and that, see that they're at least somewhat stimulative, and let's not make them the centerpiece of the package. So he made concessions there. Then he puts the whole package on the floor. He doesn't get a single Republican vote, not one. I mean, the only way you can do that is you all get together in a room and say, okay, guys, we're all voting against this, so we're not going to give him a single vote. I think that's a terrible mistake on the part of the Republican Party, because the public is not going to perceive him as having done a partisan thing. They're going to perceive the Republican Party as having done a partisan thing. So they were faced with the choice of either let's support the stimulus package, and then it goes through, in which case, are they going to get any credit for it? No. Obama would get credit for his bipartisan, collaborative style. Or they can vote against it, but if it now succeeds, they just look like reactionary obstructionists.
I'm going to have to interrupt here to you, viewer, and you, Jeff, because my director is going to thump me if I don't take a break here.
No problem.
Before we leave,
yes,
I wonder if you think that where Obama is going is overall positive and is going to be good for saving the economy and having America go in the right direction.
I think it is in general, but I do believe that they really need to keep an eye on corporate America and how they spend. I mean, the regulation, they have to keep this thumb on these people, because it's clear that corporate America has learned to live in excess and has no real sense of what budget and reform, looking and analyzing how they conduct themselves. You and I have a budget at home that we watch, and we know when the money's not coming in, we have to make some changes and make cuts here. It is apparent to me that a corporate America doesn't exercise that same kind of thinking.
Okay, we're going to need to stop now, because
Okay.
I'm going to really get in trouble. And thank you so much for calling.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very
And
much.
watch again and call back. So it's time for a break for about 3 minutes. In a moment, we're going to put up on the screen a few panels that show information that you may want to make note of during the break. You may want to get a pencil and paper right now. Let me tell you about the Dr. Don Show broadcast schedule. For you viewers who live in the Washington County part of the Portland, Oregon metro area, Dr. Don Show is broadcast 5 times each week. Typically, a news show is first aired on a Tuesday and is rebroadcast on the following Friday through Monday. You can get conversations with Dr. Don on the internet. You can tell your friends to watch Dr. Don shows on the internet anytime by going to video.google.com and entering Conversations with Dr. Don. And we have an occasional live call-in show, which you're watching right now, so we'll skip that. I want to give you a few key Washington, D.C. phone numbers in case you want to call and tell the people in Washington what you want or don't want them to do. They want to hear from you. They really do. So we're going to put those panels up on the screen right now and take a few minutes break for you to get a drink of water, whatever. Can we put those up on the screen now, please? Thank you for hanging in there. I hope you got a glass of water or whatever. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there, and they're not nearly as interesting as Dr. Seward here. Yes, they are. And we're going to talk some more about where is Obama going. So let's pick up again and keep going. And you viewers call in anytime you want to now, okay?
I'm reminded in all this sort of people saying, oh my God, where is Obama going? He hasn't done this or he's done that, and is he really a progressive? What's going on? I'm reminded of a cartoon I saw. I think it's from the Carter era. I think it was in the first year of the Carter presidency. There's this sort of grumpy, kind of rumpled, middle-aged guy in his kitchen, and his wife is sitting there at the kitchen table, and he's messing around with this kitchen appliance on the table, and he's got his hammer out and his screwdriver and so forth, and he turns to her and he says, you know, Maude, this guy's been president for a whole week and this toaster still doesn't work. And I think there's this...
I resent that.
I think there's this sense that somehow people poured into Obama these expectations that the day after he was president, it's like that speech that Hillary gave at one point. The clouds will open and the heavenly chorus will sing and everything will be changed. That's not really. Let's look at what this guy has done.
Well,
in 9 days. Let me just give you a quick list. Then I'll let you come at me. Okay, he has, by executive order, eliminated the gag rule that prevented American foreign aid from going to any organization, not only that performed abortions, but that even counseled people on abortions. That was the rule that the Bush, he eliminated that. He shut down, he signed an order to shut down Guantanamo in a year. He signed an order saying the CIA cannot torture people, must use the Army Field Manual. He signed the Lilly Ledbetter Law. By the end of this week, he'll have signed the S-chip program to extend medical care to more poor children in the country. He gave this interview to Al Arabiya to make the point that America wanted to be friendly with the Muslim world and emphasizing his own Muslim experiences. That's more in 9 days than progressives have managed to do under the Bush administration in 8 years. In a week and a half, he's done that. It just boggles my mind for people to be saying, oh, we're so disappointed in Obama. He's been there 9 days already, and the damn toaster still doesn't work.
My turn?
Sure.
Boy, you present a marvelous argument. Why is it that he's announced that he's going to escalate the violence against the people in Afghanistan? Those are the kinds of things that disappoint us. Why is it he has not come out and said something, even before he was elected, about the assault against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and the behavior of the Zionist Israelis? I'm not anti-Semitic. And why is he talking about the insurance industry being involved in universal health care? There's a number of important things like that. And why is he choosing Rahm Emanuel? And why is he choosing the guy in finance,
Geithner,
who didn't pay his taxes for many, many years? What's scaring us now, people like myself, is the people he surrounded himself with. Retreads of the Reagan and Carter administration who are beyond conservative and leaning on toward the right wing, and who are interested in maintaining and advancing monopoly capitalism and American imperialism. It's those symbols, and I hear what you're saying that he's actually done so far. I think the Republicans now in the government are waiting for him to fail, because they're going to be sure that he doesn't succeed in the next 2 or 4 years, so that they can say we had nothing to do with it.
Well, let's take a couple of those one by. Let's start with Afghanistan. That's the one that you started
yes.
with. I think. Well, I think we differ on our views of Afghanistan to begin with, but I think the Afghanistan war is the thing that might unravel the Obama presidency. I'm very concerned that he will approach that war, pour resources, pour men into it, in a way that doesn't change how we're handling the war, and that we'll get bogged down in there in a terrible way. But
we've got a call.
Just before we take the call, just one point.
Sure.
Secretary of Defense Gates, who of course is the holdover for the Bush administration, in his testimony the other day, mentioned that one of the things that he wanted to pay attention to, and of course the Bush administration would not allow him to pay attention to, was whether or not our tactics in Afghanistan could be adjusted so that fewer civilian casualties were produced by them. Well, I thought that was an extraordinary thing for Gates to say in his first appearance up on Capitol.
Let's take that call. Hello, caller. Tell us your first name and where you're calling from, please.
Hello, my name's Darius. Hello?
Yes?
I'm calling from Portland. My name's Darius.
Thank you for calling.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of quick points and get off. On the Guantanamo, wasn't Obama just actually looking at closing Guantanamo in a year? And also, they're talking about, through H.R. 645, they're talking about opening FEMA camps in the United States, and they have, there are thousands of troops that they brought back from Iraq, and they're going to be supposedly helping in times of crisis. There's like no posse comitatus, and then Obama hasn't reinstated habeas corpus, and he's still, listening to our phone calls and so on. I'm just concerned about some of these issues. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for calling.
Well, there's a lot to undo, and there's a lot of issues that Obama is sorting through. I think it isn't realistic to imagine that Obama would have come in and said, "Okay, I'm president today, and Guantanamo is going to be gone next week." I mean, one of the terrible legacies that the Bush administration has left us with is it's very difficult to figure out what we're going to do with Guantanamo. There are dangerous people at Guantanamo, and one of the terrible things about the Bush policy was that by his use of torture, it's virtually impossible to actually do a legal prosecution of lots of the people who are dangerous in Guantanamo, because all the evidence has been contaminated by torture. Either their confessions were extracted through torture, or information about them given by others was extracted through torture. So no American court will admit all that evidence. So trying to figure out who's dangerous, who's not, how do we prosecute ones where the evidence has been contaminated, who do we let go? What other countries will take some of these people and not just torture them there? Where do we move people? It's a complicated question. What I think Obama has done, I think he did this deliberately. One, he wanted to do it symbolically. I'm going to sign this thing, within a day or two. But the other thing is, I think he wanted to tie his own hands and tie the hand of his administration. He didn't say, we're going to shut down Guantanamo someday. He said, we're going to do it in a year. I read that as serving notice on everybody in his administration. I don't know how we're going to do this yet, because it's difficult and it's complicated, but get it done in a year. That was a way of putting pressure on it to make it really happen.
You're still creating a problem for me, because that makes sense what you're saying. Now let's go back to Afghanistan. I think we have something we can differ on. I get the idea that you think that America should be in Afghanistan now, and even raising troop levels. This is what Obama said.
I'm uncomfortable with that. I am not uncomfortable with continuing to resist the reassertion of Taliban control of Afghanistan. I think it would be a disaster for the Afghan people and for all kinds of things to permit that to happen.
More of a disaster than it is now with the U.S. drones bombing the
I'm not convinced that what we're doing is reducing the chance of the Taliban returning.
Which evil is worse?
Well, I think with Afghanistan, Obama has said we're going to shift resources from Iraq to Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I think he's also indicated, but only in the most vague and general ways, that he wants to tackle the war in Afghanistan differently than we've prosecuted it so far. I don't know what that difference is going to be. It might be a distinction without a difference, in which case I think we'll be in trouble, because I think our war in that whole region has generally had the effect of strengthening radical extremism rather than weakening it.
What we're doing in the Middle East, is that radical extremism?
Sometimes.
Is that terrorism?
Sometimes. But I don't think Obama is inclined to continue or to repeat those aspects of our policy that are extremist or that in some sense embrace terrorism.
So then he will...
So I'm waiting to see. On both Afghanistan and Pakistan, he's basically said, Iraq is basically over. I want to scale that down, get out of there, and I want to focus our attention on Afghanistan and Pakistan. The question is, are we going to focus on that in the same way that we've been doing it, or does he have a new approach? He says he's got a new approach, but it's very, very vague at this point.
If you're the father of an Afghan family that's been destroyed,
right,
or a Palestinian in the Gaza Strip whose family has been destroyed, and do you want to hear, we have to take our time and we have to work it through slowly or gradually? America has no business in those places there. And Israel, right now, who's the 51st state effectively of our country and America's imperialism, I think Obama should do something more radical than he's done so far. And I still agree with what you're saying.
Let me say one.
We've got a call. We've got a call.
Okay.
Can we take this call? Hello, caller. Who are you and where are you calling from?
Yeah, my name is Ryan. I'm calling from Portland, Oregon.
Thanks, Ryan. Who do you have want to talk to, a question or a comment to, Dr. Seward or me?
My question is, the troop increase worked in Iraq, and so I'm wondering why the doctor there doesn't think that it will work in Afghanistan.
Well, it worked in some respects and didn't work in other respects. I think we have a more complicated problem, actually, in Afghanistan. Something that encourages me is something that Obama got in trouble for briefly during his campaign. And that was, he made a comment about how an awful lot of what the Bush administration was doing in Afghanistan was simply producing civilian casualties without any particular military effect. And people jumped all over him, and he sort of backed off on it. But I think it revealed an underlying instinct that our military tactics in Afghanistan were as often antagonizing the population, causing unnecessary civilian casualties, and indirectly strengthening the Taliban instead of weakening it. It's not always the case that the apparent strength of using military force, no matter what kind of military force it is, no matter who it's directed against, represents a strong foreign policy. It may be the dumbest, most counterproductive thing that one can do. So I'm willing to give him a chance to define what this new strategy in Afghanistan will be. If putting more troops in, but doing it in a way that brings the Afghan population into greater collaboration with the United States, then I would support that kind of a shift in policy. But if it's simply pouring more troops in to do what we've been doing in Afghanistan, I think that would continue to give us an extremely bad image in the Middle East and recruit more people for anti-American extremism.
Well, Jeff, we're talking, I think, Carla, you said increasing troops in Iraq worked. And by worked, I think you meant, when people say that it stopped resistance, organized resistance of the Iraqi people against Americans' troops and attacks. But the end result of increasing American troops is that it increased the likelihood of the fragmentation of the country of Iraq such that it's been successful in that regard. Because the aim of American imperialism has been, let's you and him fight. it's universal. It's always been that way. They go into an area or a country, whether it's through John Perkins, I'm getting off track here, and split the people so that they fight among themselves. So now Iraq does not present a threat to Israel, and Iraq does not present an organized threat to American domination of the Middle East. And the same thing is going on in Afghanistan. And the end result is that there are peoples around the world and other countries who are saying, we see what America is doing. It's a bully. It's a terrorist state. And that's the thing I'm looking at with our behavior in Afghanistan.
This is where we really have a central disagreement, Don. I don't agree with the characterization of American foreign policy as being essentially imperialist in the world. But I do believe that American foreign policy from time to time has done imperialist things, and done poorly can give the feeling to the world that we are essentially an imperialist power and a bully, because we are the most powerful country in the world. And we need to have a foreign policy that makes it clear to the world that we are not interested in imperialism. But if you think that American foreign policy is fundamentally imperialist, you are going to be disappointed with Barack Obama's foreign policy, because he is not going to create a foreign policy that's radically different than the last 50 years of American foreign policy in some absolutely fundamental way.
What about the vast majority of countries on this globe who see American foreign policy as imperialistic? The vast majority of countries in the world.
You know, they feel that way radically more than they did 8 years ago.
They do today, and it's because of American foreign policy and what it's done in the Philippines. And
but that wasn't that was not nearly the view of the public in the world 8 years ago.
What is it today?
It's very bad. It's very bad.
Is that the view of today? So that
it is the view of much of the world today, and
that's
a consequence of the mistakes of the Bush era. But I think that kind of thing.
It isn't just the Bush era.
Well, no. I mean, there are other aspects of American foreign policy have deep roots, but Bush accentuated all of that, and I think you're going to see Obama first move the atmospherics of American foreign policy in a radically different direction. But I think also fundamentally, because I think that principle of inclusiveness that I started with, since we have so little time, maybe it's the place to bring it back around.
Sure.
I think Obama has that same instinct internationally. He is not going to try to dismantle free trade. He's not going to be an anti-globalization person in a general way. But I do believe that Obama is committed to the principle that the benefits of economic growth globally need to be shared, and that everybody needs to get a piece of those benefits, or the world as a whole will turn against America.
They're turning, and we got to stop now. I'm so glad you came.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So let me say a few things here, because my director is yelling at me.
Your show's too short, Don. It always needs to be 2 hours.
Keep your pens and pencils handy, because you may want to jot down something that we'll show you in the closing credits. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. The next live call-in we have, be sure and call in again and watch what's going on. And I'll try to have somebody as interesting as Jeff here, as Dr. Seward, really. My email address is friendlydon@aol.com. Email me and let me know what you think. And you can email Dr. Seward, of course. His email address was up. A few public service announcements I'd like to make. The Alliance for Democracy is an organization that I belong to, and it's a sort of a grassroots organization that works on political and social issues. And there's a chapter, a Portland chapter here, a local chapter. There's our website and phone number, and talk to David Duck when you call and tell him that I said you should call and see what we're about over there. I can't leave out the ACLU. That's an organization I've been a member of for 30,000 years, it seems. The American Civil Liberties Union. Thank goodness for the ACLU. Without the ACLU, we probably would have civil rights more depleted than they are under this previous administration. And the ACLU hotline, if you think you've been stopped because of how you look rather than some possible criminal activity by over-eager law enforcement, there's a number to call. The ACLU wants to know about it. So before we say goodnight, I want to say thank you to my wonderful crew and my director, and to the teachers and managers at TBC TV studios in Beaverton, Oregon, where the Conversations with Dr. Don show is produced. I want to thank you viewers in other parts of the country too. Thank you for watching. And if you live in another part of the country and are watching this show, contact your local community access TV studio for information about when they're showing Dr. Don shows. So, and I gotta always end with KFC. You know that KFC, don't you? Not Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Yep.
Jeff. Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, chokes me up, and charitable. KFC, be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. And thanks again for watching. Good night.
Good night.